Imagine stepping back in time nearly 300 years. The year is 1718. The land that will become San Antonio. Texas is a wilderness frontier, home to indigenous peoples who have lived here for thousands of years. Spanish conquistadors and missionaries are pushing northward from Mexico, driven by faith, empire, and dreams of converting souls to Christianity. What they built here would change the course of history. Today, the 5 Spanish missions of San Antonio stand as magnificent reminders of a complex, often controversial, but undeniably fascinating chapter in American history. These aren't just old buildings or tourist attractions, they're UNESCO World Heritage Sites, living testaments to cultural collision, religious fervor, architectural genius, and human resilience. In this video, we're going to explore the complete story of San Antonio's Spanish missions. We'll discover why they were built, who built them, what life was like within their walls, and how they shaped the city that stands here today. From the famous Alamo to the stunning Mission San Jose, we'll uncover stories of faith, conflict, survival, and transformation. So let's journey back to the early 18th century and discover how a handful of Spanish missionaries and soldiers created something that would endure for centuries. To understand why the Spanish missions came to San Antonio, we need to understand the bigger picture of Spanish colonization in the Americas. By the early 1700s, Spain had been the dominant European power in the Americas for over 2 centuries. From the Caribbean to South America, from Mexico to the southwestern territories that would later become part of the United States, the Spanish flag flew over vast stretches of land. But Spain faced a problem. Their empire was enormous, but their actual control was often tenuous, especially on the northern frontiers. Other European powers, particularly France, were establishing their own presence in North America. French traders and explorers were pushing westward from the Mississippi River, and Spanish authorities in Mexico City were worried. The solution? A 3-part colonization strategy that had worked elsewhere: missions, presidios, and pueblos. Missions were religious settlements run by Catholic priests, primarily Franciscan friars. Their official purpose was to convert Native Americans to Christianity and to civilize them according to Spanish customs. But make no mistake, they also served Spain's imperial interests by establishing Spanish presence and control. Presidios were military forts with small garrisons of soldiers who protected the missions and maintained Spanish authority. Pueblos were civilian settlements where Spanish colonists could farm and ranch. Together, these 3 elements formed the backbone of Spanish frontier colonization, and nowhere would this system be more visible, more enduring than in San Antonio. But why San Antonio specifically? What made this particular spot so important? The story of Spanish San Antonio begins with water. In the semi-arid landscape of South Texas, the San Antonio River and its springs were like an oasis. Indigenous peoples had long recognized this, establishing seasonal camps and villages in the area. The Spanish first became aware of this area in 1691, when a Spanish expedition led by Governor Domingo Terán de los Rios passed through. They noted the abundant water and named it in honor of Saint Anthony of Padua, whose feast day happened to fall on June 13th, the day they arrived. But it would be nearly 3 decades before the Spanish would establish a permanent presence here. The catalyst came from a Franciscan missionary named Father Antonio de San Buenaventura y Olivares. In 1716, while stationed at missions in East Texas, Father Olivares petitioned the Spanish authorities to establish a mission at the San Antonio River. He had visited the site and was convinced it was perfect: abundant water, fertile soil, and a substantial Native American population who could potentially be converted. Initially, his requests were denied, but geopolitics would change everything. In 1718, France established New Orleans, solidifying their presence in Louisiana and putting them dangerously close to Spanish territory. Suddenly, establishing a strong Spanish presence in Texas became a strategic imperative. The Spanish crown authorized not just a mission, but a complete settlement at San Antonio. On May 1st, 1718, Father Olivares established Mission San Antonio de Valero. Just 4 days later, on May 5th, the military governor, Martin de Alarcón, established the Presidio San Antonio de Becar and the civilian settlement that would become San Antonio. The city was born, but the mission, San Antonio de Valero, was just the beginning. Over the next dozen years, 4 more missions would be established in the San Antonio area, creating a chain of religious settlements along the San Antonio River that would define the region for generations. Let's get oriented. By 1731, San Antonio had 5 missions, all located along approximately 10 miles of the San Antonio River. From north to south, they were Mission San Antonio de Valero, founded in 1718, later known as the Alamo Mission San Jose y San Miguel de Aguayo, founded in 1720, often called the Queen of the Missions. Misión Nuestra Señora de la Purísima Concepción de Acuña, founded in East Texas in 1716, moved to San Antonio in 1731, Mission San Juan Capistrano, founded in East Texas in 1716, moved to San Antonio in 1731, Mission San Francisco de la Espada, founded in East Texas in 1690, moved to San Antonio in 1731. 3 of these missions were originally established in East Texas, but were relocated to San Antonio because the East Texas missions had struggled. The climate was harsh, diseases decimated the native populations, and the missions simply couldn't sustain themselves. San Antonio, with its better water supply and more moderate conditions, offered a fresh start. Together, these 5 missions formed a remarkable chain of religious and agricultural communities that would transform the landscape and the lives of thousands of people. Now, let's explore each mission in detail and discover what made them unique. Of all the San Antonio missions, one name resonates far beyond Texas, far beyond even the United States: the Alamo. But before it was the site of one of America's most famous battles, it was Mission San Antonio de Valero, the first and northernmost of the San Antonio missions. Founded by Father Olivares on May 1st, 1718, the mission was initially located on the west side of the San Antonio River. Due to disease and other challenges, it moved several times before settling at its present location on the east side around 1724. The mission was named for St. Anthony of Padua, San Antonio, and for the Duke of Valero, the Spanish viceroy of Mexico at the time. Its purpose was the same as all Spanish missions: to convert the local indigenous peoples, primarily the Coahuiltecan tribes, to Catholicism and to incorporate them into Spanish colonial society. Life at Mission Valero in its early decades was challenging. The missionaries worked to attract Native Americans to the mission, offering them food, protection, and instruction in Christianity. Those who agreed to live at the mission, called neophytes, were expected to work the mission's fields, tend livestock, learn crafts, and attend religious services. The mission grew slowly but steadily. By the 1740s and 1750s, it housed several hundred Native Americans and had developed agricultural fields, livestock herds, and workshops. A stone church was begun, though it was never completed to the missionaries' satisfaction. The mission buildings included living quarters, workshops, storage rooms, and defensive walls. But the mission faced constant challenges. Diseases brought by Europeans devastated the native populations. Comanche and Apache raids threatened the mission. And as the 18th century progressed, the number of Native Americans willing to live in the mission system decreased. By 1793, after 75 years of operation, Mission San Antonio de Valero was secularized. Its lands were distributed, and it ceased to function as a mission. The Spanish military took over the buildings, and it became a garrison. Spanish soldiers from Alamo de Parras in Mexico were stationed there, and they called their new post the Alamo after their home. The name stuck. For the next few decades, the Alamo served various military purposes under Spanish, Mexican, and Texan flags. Then came 1836, a year that would make the Alamo immortal. In February and March of 1836, during the Texas Revolution, approximately 200 Texan defenders occupied the Alamo against a Mexican army of thousands, led by General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. After a 13-day siege, Mexican forces stormed the walls on March 6th, killing nearly all the defenders, including legendary figures like William Travis, James Bowie, and Davy Crockett. Remember the Alamo became the rallying cry for Texas independence, which was won at the Battle of San Jacinto just 6 weeks later. Today, the Alamo is one of the most visited historic sites in America. Millions of tourists walk through its doors each year, standing where James Bowie fell and Davy Crockett made his last stand. But few realize they're standing in what was once a Spanish mission, a place of prayer and daily labor for Native American converts more than a century before the famous battle. The Alamo's mission legacy is often overshadowed by its role in Texas independence, but understanding its origins as Mission San Antonio de Valero gives us a fuller picture of this remarkable place. If the Alamo is the most famous of the San Antonio missions, Mission San Jose y San Miguel de Aguayo is the most beautiful, the most complete, and the most successful. It's often called the Queen of the Missions, and once you see it, you'll understand why. Mission San Jose was founded on February 23, 1720, just 2 years after Mission Valero. It was established by Father Antonio Margil de Jesus, a legendary Franciscan missionary who had spent decades working on the Spanish frontier. The mission was named for Saint Joseph and for the Marquis de San Miguel de Aguayo, the governor of Texas and Coahuila. Father Margil chose the location carefully, about 5 miles south of Mission Valero, on the east bank of the San Antonio River. The site had good water, fertile soil, and access to Native American populations. From the beginning, Mission San Jose was more ambitious than Mission Valero. Father Margil envisioned not just a mission, but a complete, self-sustaining community. And that's exactly what it became. At its peak in the mid-18th century, Mission San Jose was home to over 300 Native Americans, primarily from Coahuiltecan tribes. It covered over 5,000 acres and was surrounded by massive limestone walls that created a secure compound nearly 470 feet long. The mission was like a small city. Inside the walls were the magnificent church, living quarters for the native converts arranged around the central plaza, workshops where artisans practiced blacksmithing, carpentry, weaving, and other crafts, granaries for storing wheat and corn, and even a mill. Outside the walls spread the mission's agricultural lands. Residents grew corn, beans, squash, melons, and peppers. They cultivated orchards with peaches, figs, and pomegranates. They raised cattle, sheep, goats, and horses. The mission even had its own ranches, located miles away, where large herds of livestock grazed. But the true glory of Mission San Jose is its architecture, particularly its church. Construction on the present church began in 1768 and was completed around 1782. It's built of limestone blocks with walls up to 5 feet thick. The structure is massive yet graceful, combining Spanish Baroque and Moorish influences into something uniquely beautiful. The most famous feature is the rose window, actually a window above the sacristy door that features an incredibly ornate carved frame of flowers, leaves, and religious symbols. Legend says it was carved by sculptor Pedro Huizar in memory of his lost love, Rosa. Whether that's true or not, the artistry is undeniable. It's one of the finest examples of Spanish colonial stone carving in North America. Inside the church, the restoration has revealed the beauty of the original structure: the soaring nave, the altar, the choir loft. You can almost hear the voices of hundreds of native converts singing hymns in Spanish and in their own languages, the sounds echoing off the limestone walls. But what was daily life actually like at Mission San Jose? The mission operated on a strict schedule. Bells rang throughout the day, calling residents to prayer, meals, and work. The day began before dawn with morning prayers. After a simple breakfast, residents went to their assigned tasks, working in the fields, tending livestock, making tools and textiles, or learning in the mission school. The missionaries, primarily Franciscan friars, ran the mission with military precision. They taught Christianity, but they also taught practical skills: farming techniques, animal husbandry, construction, and various crafts. The goal was to make the Native Americans productive members of Spanish colonial society. Meals were communal and simple: corn, beans, and occasionally meat. The mission provided clothing, shelter, and protection in exchange for labor and conversion. It wasn't an equal partnership. The friars held all the real authority. Native Americans were expected to abandon their traditional ways, languages, and beliefs. Those who resisted could face punishment. It was, fundamentally, a system of cultural erasure, however good the intentions of individual missionaries might have been. Yet many Native Americans did choose to live at the missions, at least for a time. Why? The reasons varied: protection from hostile tribes, access to food during droughts, genuine spiritual conversion, or simply survival in a rapidly changing world where their traditional ways of life were becoming impossible. The mission system was deeply paternalistic and coercive, but it was also, in a strange way, adaptive. It created a new kind of community, a blend of Spanish and native cultures that would influence Texas society for centuries. Mission San Jose thrived until the late 18th century, but by the 1790s, as Spanish power waned and native populations declined, from disease and cultural pressures, the missions began to struggle. In 1794, Mission San Jose was secularized. The mission lands were distributed, and the community dispersed. For over a century, the mission fell into ruin. The church was used sporadically, but the other buildings crumbled. By the early 20th century, Mission San Jose was in danger of disappearing entirely. Then came a remarkable restoration effort. In the 1930s, during the Great Depression, the Works Progress Administration funded a massive reconstruction of the mission. Workers carefully rebuilt walls, repaired the church, and restored the compound based on historical records and archaeological evidence. Today, Mission San Jose is not just a museum, it's still a functioning parish church. Mass is celebrated regularly. Visitors can explore the entire compound, walk through the Native American living quarters, see the granary, and stand in the magnificent church. In 2015, Mission San Jose, along with the other San Antonio missions, except the Alamo, was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site, recognized as an outstanding example of Spanish colonial mission culture. Standing in the compound of Mission San Jose today, you're standing in a place that tells multiple stories: the story of Spanish imperial ambition, the story of Franciscan dedication, the story of Native American resilience and loss, and the story of a unique cultural synthesis that helped create modern Texas. About 2 miles south of Mission San Jose stands Mission Nuestra Señora de la Purísima Concepción de Acuña, or Mission Concepción for short. And this mission has a distinction that makes it absolutely invaluable. It's the oldest unrestored stone church in America. That means what you see when you visit Mission Concepcion is largely what Spanish missionaries and Native Americans saw when it was completed in the 1750s. No major reconstruction, no 20th century restoration, just the original structure, weathered by time but fundamentally unchanged. Mission Concepcion wasn't originally built in San Antonio. It was first established in 1716 in East Texas, near present-day Nacogdoches. But like several other missions, it struggled there. Disease, hostile native tribes, and lack of resources made survival difficult. In 1731, Mission Concepcion was relocated to San Antonio, along with missions San Juan and Espada. The move was part of a reorganization of the Spanish mission system in Texas, consolidating resources where they had the best chance of success. The missionaries chose a site on a bend of the San Antonio River, on higher ground that provided good drainage and defense. Almost immediately, they began constructing a permanent stone church. The church they built is a masterpiece of Spanish colonial architecture. It follows a cruciform plan, shaped like a cross, with a central nave, transepts on either side, and a sanctuary. Twin bell towers rise on either side of the facade, giving the church a distinctive silhouette that's recognizable from a distance. The walls are built of tufa limestone, quarried locally. They're over 3 feet thick, providing excellent insulation against Texas heat and cold. The construction technique is fascinating. The stones aren't precisely cut, but are fitted together with mortar, creating a strong, durable structure. But here's what makes Mission Concepcion truly extraordinary. When it was built, it was covered in colorful frescoes. Yes, this whitewashed stone church we see today was once ablaze with color. Recent investigations using special lighting techniques have revealed traces of the original painted designs. Geometric patterns in red, yellow, blue, and black covered the exterior walls. Inside, religious symbols and decorative motifs adorned the sanctuary. Imagine approaching this church in 1755. You'd see vibrant colors, intricate patterns, a building that announced its importance and its divine purpose from a distance. It must have been spectacular, especially in a frontier landscape of simple wooden structures. Over the centuries, Weather and time wore away most of the paint, leaving the bare stone we see today. But conservators have carefully documented and preserved the traces that remain, giving us glimpses of that original glory. Beyond the church, Mission Concepcion had the typical mission compound, living quarters for native converts arranged around a plaza, workshops, a granary, and protective walls. At its peak in the mid 1700s, about 200 people lived at the mission. Like all the missions, Concepcion served multiple purposes. It was a church, a school, a farm, a ranch, and a fortress all in one. The missionaries taught Christianity and Spanish language and customs. Native Americans worked the mission's fields, tended livestock, and learned various trades. The mission's lands were extensive. Native workers grew corn, beans, chili peppers, and cotton. They raised cattle, sheep, and goats. The mission even had vineyards. Yes, they made wine in Spanish Texas. An important feature of Mission Concepcion and all the San Antonio missions was their irrigation systems. The Spanish and the Native Americans worked together to build acequias, irrigation ditches that channeled water from the San Antonio River to the mission fields. These acequias were engineering marvels for their time. They were carefully surveyed and constructed with precise gradients to ensure water flowed where it was needed. Some were several miles long. They transformed the landscape, turning semi-arid land into productive farmland. You can still see remnants of the acequia system at Mission Concepcion today, a testament to the ingenuity and hard work of the people who built them nearly 3 centuries ago. Mission Concepcion was secularized in 1794. Like the other missions, the land was distributed and the community dispersed. But unlike some of the other missions, the church at Concepcion continued to be used for religious services. Through the 19th and early 20th centuries, even as other buildings crumbled, the church remained active. This continuous use is one reason it survived in such good condition. A building that's used is maintained. A building that's abandoned falls apart. During the Texas Revolution in 1835, Mission Concepcion was the site of a significant battle. On October 28, 1835, Texan forces under James Bowie and James Fannin fought Mexican troops in and around the mission. The Texans won a decisive victory, one of the first battles of the Revolution. Bullet marks from that battle can still be seen in some of the mission's walls. Today, Mission Concepcion is part of the San Antonio Mission's National Historical Park and a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's still an active Catholic parish with regular services held in the historic church. When you walk into Mission Concepcion, you're walking into a building that has witnessed nearly 300 years of history. The limestone floor worn smooth by countless footsteps, the thick walls that have sheltered worshippers from summer heat and winter cold for generations, the vaulted ceiling that has echoed with prayers in Spanish, in indigenous languages, and in English, and you're experiencing architecture almost exactly as it was meant to be experienced, because Mission Concepcion, remarkably, is still itself. The two southernmost missions in the San Antonio chain are Mission San Juan Capistrano and Mission San Francisco de la Espada. While they're often less visited than their northern neighbors, they have their own fascinating stories and unique contributions to the mission system. Mission San Juan Capistrano was first established in East Texas in 1716 as San Jose de los Nazones. Like Concepcion, it struggled in East Texas and was relocated to San Antonio in 1731. where it was renamed San Juan Capistrano after St. John of Capistrano, a 15th century Franciscan priest. The mission was located about 6 miles south of Mission San Jose on the east bank of the San Antonio River. The location was strategic. It had good agricultural land and access to water, but it was also far enough from the other missions to serve different Native American groups without competition. Mission San Juan became known for its agricultural productivity. The mission's fields produced abundant corn, beans, squash, and melons. But what really set San Juan apart was its orchards and its emphasis on specialized agriculture. The mission cultivated extensive fruit orchards: peaches, apricots, figs, pomegranates, and perhaps most importantly, grapes for wine production. Mission San Juan became a supplier of agricultural products to the other missions and to the growing civilian population of San Antonio. The mission also had substantial ranching operations. At its peak, Mission San Juan's herds numbered in the thousands: cattle, sheep, goats, and horses grazing on mission lands that extended for miles. What's particularly interesting about Mission San Juan is its economic specialization. While all missions aimed for self sufficiency, San Juan went beyond that, becoming a supplier to the broader colonial economy. This made it economically important and helped it survive longer than some other missions. The church at Mission San Juan is simpler than those at Concepcion or San Jose, but it has a rustic beauty. The present church was built in the 1750s with thick limestone walls and a single bell tower. The facade is decorated with simple but elegant stonework. Inside, the church retains much of its original character. Recent restoration work has revealed traces of the original painted decorations, giving us insights into how the interior would have looked in the 18th century. One of the most interesting features at Mission San Juan is the Old Mill, located just outside the main compound. In the 1790s, the mission built a grist mill to grind grain. You can still see the remains of this mill today, including the water channel that powered it. It's a tangible reminder of the mission's economic sophistication. At its peak, around 1760, Mission San Juan housed about 200 Native Americans, primarily from Coahuiltecan tribes. They lived in simple stone or adobe rooms arranged around the mission plaza, worked the fields and ranches, learned trades, and attended daily religious services. Mission San Juan was secularized in 1794. The mission lands were distributed, though the church continued to serve the local community. Over the years, much of the original compound crumbled, but the church remained. The southernmost and oldest of the San Antonio missions, in terms of its original founding date, is Mission San Francisco de la Espada, or simply Mission Espada. Mission Espada has the most complex history. It was first founded in 1690 in East Texas as Mission San Francisco de los Tejas, the very first mission in Texas. It was abandoned in 1693, refounded in 1716, and then moved to San Antonio in 1731, where it was renamed San Francisco de la Espada. Espada means sword in Spanish, a reference to St. Francis of Assisi, in whose name the mission was founded. St. Francis was often depicted bearing a sword of faith. Located about 9 miles south of Mission San Jose, Mission Espada was the most remote of the San Antonio missions. This isolation shaped its character. It served Native American groups who preferred to be farther from Spanish civilian settlements and had somewhat more autonomy as a result. The church at Mission Espada is one of the most picturesque of all the mission churches. Built in the 1740s and 1750s, it's smaller than the churches at Concepcion or San Jose, but it has a charm all its own. The facade features a unique architectural element. Three bells hang in openings in the curved parapet above the entrance, creating a distinctive silhouette. The stone cross atop the facade is simple but powerful. The entire structure has an elegance and simplicity that's deeply appealing. Inside, the church is intimate rather than grand, but that intimacy has its own power. You can easily imagine the small congregation of missionaries and native converts gathering here for prayers, the voices of hymns filling the modest space. Mission Espada became known for its crafts, particularly carpentry and textile production. The mission had skilled craftsmen who produced furniture, tools, and woven goods not just for their own use, but for trade. But the most impressive feature at Mission Espada isn't the church or the compound, it's the acequia, the irrigation system. The Espada Aqueduct, built around 1740, is the most intact Spanish colonial aqueduct in the United States. This stone structure carried water from the Espada Dam across Piedras Creek to the mission's fields. It's about 15 feet high and over 50 feet long, built of limestone with a graceful arched design. Walking beneath the Espada Aqueduct today is like walking beneath a bridge built by ancient Romans. It's a stunning example of Spanish colonial engineering, and it still functions. Water still flows through it, still irrigates fields, still connects us directly to the ingenuity of people who lived here 280 years ago. The Espada Acequia system is about 7 miles long in total, one of the longest of the mission acequias. It's a designated National Historic Civil Engineering Landmark, one of the oldest irrigation systems in continuous use in the United States. At its peak, Mission Espada housed about 200 people. Like the other missions, it raised cattle, sheep, and goats, grew crops, and operated as a largely self-sufficient community. Mission Espada was secularized in 1794, but like Concepcion and San Juan, the church continued to serve the local community. It's still an active parish church today, with regular masses held in the historic building. Both Mission San Juan and Mission Espada are part of the San Antonio Mission's National Historical Park and the UNESCO World Heritage Site. They offer visitors a quieter, more contemplative experience than the busier missions to the north. Walking their grounds, you get a strong sense of what daily life might have been like in these frontier communities. We've explored each of the 5 missions individually, but now let's step back and understand what daily life was really like for the people who lived in this unique system. The indigenous peoples who came to live at the San Antonio missions were primarily from groups collectively called Coahuiltecans. This wasn't a single tribe, but a general term for numerous small bands who lived in South Texas and northeastern Mexico. These were hunter-gatherer peoples who had lived in the region for thousands of years. They had their own languages, spiritual beliefs, social structures, and ways of life perfectly adapted to the harsh South Texas environment. Different Coahuiltecan bands had different names: Payaya, Pajalat, Sulujam, Yamparica, and many others. Each had their own territory, customs, and identity. When the Spanish arrived, these native peoples faced an impossible situation. European diseases, to which they had no immunity, began devastating their populations. Competition for resources increased. Traditional hunting grounds were disrupted. Hostile tribes like the Apache, and later the Comanche, who were themselves being pushed southward by European expansion, raided their territories. The missions offered a form of survival, protection, food security, and adaptation to a changing world. But survival came at an enormous cost: the loss of language, culture, traditional ways, and autonomy. Life in the missions followed a rigid schedule structured around work and prayer. Let's walk through a typical day. The day began before sunrise, usually around 5 a.m., when bells rang for morning prayers. Everyone was expected to attend Mass in the church. The service was in Latin and Spanish, though sometimes missionaries would preach in indigenous languages. After Mass, around 6:30 a.m., residents ate breakfast, typically corn porridge, atole, and perhaps some bread. From 7 a.m. until noon, work began. The mission operated like a large farm and workshop complex. Men worked in the fields, planting, weeding, and harvesting crops. They tended the mission's livestock: cattle, sheep, goats, and horses. Some worked in specialized roles: blacksmiths, carpenters, stonemasons, or vaqueros, cowboys, on the mission's distant ranches. Women had their own work assignments. They prepared food for the community, ground corn into flour, made tortillas and bread, prepared meat and vegetables. They wove cloth, made clothing, created textiles and baskets. They helped in the gardens and with smaller livestock. Children attended school, learning basic literacy in Spanish, Catholic doctrine, and various skills depending on their gender. At noon, bells rang again for the Angelus prayer, followed by the midday meal, the main meal of the day. This might include corn, beans, squash, chili peppers, and occasionally meat. After a brief rest, work resumed from around 2:40 p.m. until 6 p.m. The same tasks continued: fieldwork, livestock care, craft production, and maintenance of the mission buildings and infrastructure. Around 6 p.m., bells rang for evening prayers. Afterward, supper was served, usually leftovers from the midday meal or a simple stew. The evening might include some free time for socializing, but by 8:30 or 9 p.m., residents were expected to retire to their quarters. The mission gates were locked for the night. This routine was the same every day, with modifications for Sundays and religious feast days, when less work was done and more time was devoted to elaborate religious services. Native American families lived in small stone or adobe rooms arranged around the mission compound. These rooms were simple, usually 1 or 2 rooms per family, with dirt floors, small windows, and minimal furnishings. Families slept on the wooden platforms or mats. They had few personal possessions: some clothing, perhaps a few tools or implements, religious items given by the missionaries. Privacy was limited. The compound was crowded, and the friars monitored behavior closely. Unmarried men and women were kept separated. Families were expected to follow Spanish Catholic morality. The mission diet was based on what the community could grow or raise. Corn was the staple, ground into flour for tortillas and tamales, made into porridge or roasted. Beans and squash were dietary mainstays. Chili peppers added flavor. The missions grew vegetables like onions, cabbage, and melons. Fruit from orchards provided variety: peaches, figs, pomegranates. Meat was eaten, but not daily. The missions slaughtered cattle, sheep, or goats for special occasions or Sunday meals. Mission residents also supplemented their diet by fishing in the San Antonio River and hunting small game when allowed. The missions produced their own wine for religious services and sometimes for consumption. They may have also made pulque or other fermented beverages. By most accounts, mission residents had adequate food most of the time, which was better than many native groups faced in the increasingly difficult conditions outside the missions, but the diet was monotonous and controlled by the friars. The primary purpose of the missions was religious conversion, and this shaped everything about mission life. Children and adults received religious instruction. They learned Catholic prayers, the Catechism, and Bible stories. They were baptized and expected to attend daily Mass and other services. But the missionaries also provided practical education. Men learned Spanish agricultural techniques, how to care for European livestock, and various trades. Women learned Spanish cooking, textile production using European tools, and household management. Some Native Americans learned to read and write Spanish. The most gifted might be trained as cantors to lead singing during religious services or as sacristans to assist the priests. The goal was complete cultural transformation to turn Native Americans into Catholic, Spanish speaking, settled agriculturalists, essentially into Spanish peasants. The missions weren't prisons. Native Americans could theoretically leave, but in practice, leaving meant facing a hostile world with few alternatives. And while at the mission, strict discipline was enforced. Friars had the authority to punish residents for infractions, missing Mass, failing to work, fighting, adultery, or practicing traditional indigenous religious customs. Punishments could include public whippings, time in stocks, extra work details, or confinement. The Spanish soldiers at the nearby Presidio could be called in for serious infractions. This paternalistic, coercive system was justified by the Spanish as necessary for civilizing and converting indigenous peoples. But it was fundamentally a system that denied Native Americans autonomy and dignity. Not surprisingly, Native Americans didn't always accept mission life passively. There were forms of resistance. Some people fled the missions, returning to their traditional ways. Others practiced their indigenous religions in secret, maintaining spiritual traditions alongside Catholic observance. Some resistance was more subtle, working slowly, hiding food, teaching children native languages in private. The missions had to negotiate constantly with native residents, making accommodations to keep people from leaving entirely. But there was also genuine adaptation. Some Native Americans did convert sincerely to Catholicism. They learned new skills, created new communities, and found ways to survive in a changing world. The mission system created a unique blended culture, Native people speaking Spanish and indigenous languages, practicing Catholicism with indigenous influences, using both European and Native technologies. This cultural blending, however coerced, shaped Texas culture for generations. By the late 18th century, the mission system was failing. Multiple factors contributed to this decline. First, disease continued to devastate native populations. Smallpox, measles, typhus, and other European diseases swept through the missions repeatedly. The confined living conditions made epidemics worse. Entire families were wiped out. The native population at the missions dwindled. Second, the mission system's fundamental goal, converting and assimilating large native populations, became impossible as those populations declined. There simply weren't enough native people interested in mission life to sustain the system. Third, Spanish colonial policy changed. By the 1790s, Spanish authorities questioned whether the missions were worth the expense. The missions hadn't created the stable, productive communities Spain had hoped for. They required constant subsidies and military protection, Fourth, the missions faced increasing raids from Apache and Comanche warriors. These powerful tribes, themselves under pressure from European expansion, raided the missions for horses, cattle, and captives. The mission's defensive walls and nearby presidios couldn't always protect them. Finally, the rise of civilian ranching and farming reduced the mission's economic importance. Spanish and mestizo, mixed Spanish native settlers, established their own ranches and farms, producing what the missions had produced and competing for land and resources. In 1794, the Spanish crown ordered the secularization of the San Antonio missions. This meant the missions ceased to function as religious communities. Mission lands were distributed to Native American residents and others. The churches became regular parish churches. The elaborate mission infrastructure was abandoned. Many Native Americans left the missions entirely, either returning to nomadic life, joining other indigenous groups, or moving to Spanish settlements. Some stayed on their distributed lands and became small farmers or ranchers. The Franciscan missionaries left. The dream of creating a chain of self-sufficient Christian communities on the frontier was over. After secularization, the San Antonio missions entered a long period of decline and near abandonment. The early 19th century brought even more upheaval. Mexico won independence from Spain in 1821. Then came the Texas Revolution in 1835, 1836, followed by the Republic of Texas, and finally Texas joining the United States in 1845. The old mission buildings, no longer maintained, began to crumble. Mission Valero's transformation into the Alamo and its role in the Texas Revolution gave it special status, but even it fell into disrepair. At Missions Concepcion, San Juan, and Espada, the churches continued to serve small local communities, which helped preserve them. But the other mission buildings, the living quarters, workshops, granaries, slowly collapsed. Mission San Jose suffered terribly. By the late 1800s, much of it was in ruins. Walls collapsed. The beautiful carved facade weathered and eroded. The compound became a picturesque ruin, popular with artists and photographers, but increasingly at risk of disappearing entirely. Then, in the early 20th century, came a growing awareness of the mission's historical importance. Conservationists, historians, and civic leaders argued for preservation. The Catholic Church, which still owned most of the mission churches, worked to maintain them as active parishes. In the 1930s, a major turning point came with the Great Depression. President Franklin D. Roosevelt's Works Progress Administration, WPA, funded large-scale restoration projects to create jobs. Mission San Jose received the most extensive restoration. Walls were rebuilt, the church was repaired, and much of the compound was reconstructed based on historical records and archaeology. Similar work was done at the other missions, though less extensively. The goal was to preserve these important landmarks and make them accessible to the public. In 1978, the National Park Service established San Antonio Missions National Historical Park, encompassing Missions Concepcion, San Jose, San Juan, and Espada. The Alamo, separately owned and managed, wasn't included, but the four southern missions received federal protection and interpretation. This was crucial. It meant professional management, ongoing preservation, and education programs to help visitors understand these complex sites. Then, in 2015, came international recognition. UNESCO designated San Antonio Missions as a World Heritage Site. This put the San Antonio Missions in the same category as the pyramids of Giza, Machu Picchu, and the Great Wall of China, places of outstanding universal value to humanity. The UNESCO designation recognized the missions as exceptional examples of Spanish colonial architecture and culture, and as important sites for understanding the interaction between European and indigenous cultures in the Americas. Today, the San Antonio missions are living monuments. They're not just museums or archaeological sites, they're active, functioning communities. All 5 mission churches remain active Catholic parishes. Mass is celebrated regularly. Baptisms, weddings, and funerals take place in these 300-year-old buildings. For many local families, these are their churches, just as they were for families centuries ago. The missions are also major tourist destinations. Over 1 million people visit the San Antonio Missions National Historical Park each year. School groups take field trips. Historians conduct research. Artists sketch and photograph these beautiful buildings. The missions are connected by the Mission Trail, a driving and hiking route that allows visitors to experience all 5 missions in sequence, understanding their relationship to each other and to the San Antonio River. At each mission, Park Service rangers and volunteers offer tours, programs, and interpretive exhibits. You can learn about mission history, architecture, daily life, and the complex legacy of the Spanish colonial period. Cultural events bring the missions to life. Living history demonstrations showing traditional crafts, concerts of Spanish colonial music, celebrations of religious feast days that would have been important in mission times. The missions are also important sites for Native American communities. Though the Coahuiltecan tribes who lived at the missions were mostly dispersed or absorbed into other populations, their descendants and other native groups recognize these as places where indigenous history unfolded, for better and worse. There's ongoing work to tell more complete and honest stories about the missions, acknowledging the coercive nature of the mission system, the devastating impact on native cultures, and the resilience of indigenous peoples who survived and adapted. Conservation continues. The limestone buildings require constant maintenance. Experts monitor structural stability, treat erosion, and work to preserve original materials and decorative elements. Archaeological excavations continue to reveal new information about mission life. Fragments of pottery, tools, food remains, and building foundations help us understand what daily life was really like. The San Antonio missions are many things. They're architectural marvels, beautiful buildings that combine Spanish, Moorish, and indigenous influences into something unique to the American Southwest. They're engineering wonders, the acequias, dams, and agricultural systems that transformed the landscape and made productive farming possible in a challenging environment. They're historical landmarks, places where the Spanish colonial frontier unfolded, where cultures collided and blended, where the foundations of modern Texas were laid. But they're also sites of profound complexity and contradiction. They represent religious devotion and imperial ambition, charitable intentions and cultural destruction, community and coercion, survival and loss. For Native Americans, the missions were places of both refuge and oppression. They offered security and food, but demanded the abandonment of language, culture, and traditional ways of life. Thousands of indigenous people died in the missions from disease and hardship. Their cultures were systematically suppressed. For the Spanish missionaries, mostly Franciscan friars. The missions represented a life's work of devotion, often in harsh and dangerous conditions. Many missionaries believed they were saving souls and improving lives, even as the system they served was fundamentally unjust. For the Spanish Empire, the missions were strategic outposts that secured territory, produced resources, and extended control. Understanding this complexity is crucial. We can appreciate the mission's architectural beauty and historical importance, while also acknowledging the human cost and the injustices of the colonial system. The missions are survivors. They've endured floods, wars, abandonment, and the passage of nearly 3 centuries. That they still stand, still function, still inspire is remarkable. When you visit the missions today, you're walking in the footsteps of Spanish friars, Native American converts, Mexican soldiers, Texan revolutionaries, and generations of worshipers. You're experiencing spaces that have witnessed joy and suffering, faith and doubt, birth and death for hundreds of years. The San Antonio missions are UNESCO World Heritage Sites, not just because they're old or beautiful, but because they're irreplaceable testimonies to a crucial period in human history, the encounter between the old world and the new, with all its promise and tragedy. They remind us that history is never simple, that the past contains multitudes, and that places can hold many stories at once. So, the next time you're in San Antonio, take the time to visit these remarkable places. Walk through the compounds, stand in the churches, look at the weathered limestone, the carved doors, the worn floors. Listen to the echoes of the past, and remember, these walls have stories to tell, stories of ambition and faith, of loss and resilience, of people trying to survive and make meaning in a changing world. The missions of San Antonio endure, not as monuments to a simple past, but as complex, layered places that continue to teach us, challenge us, and inspire us. Closing drone footage of all 5 missions at sunset. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the Spanish missions of San Antonio. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and share. And if you have the chance, visit these incredible places in person. History isn't just in books, it's in these stones, these walls, these sacred spaces that connect us to the past and to each other. Until next time, keep exploring history